Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Pillow, Hover, and Woven. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, of course, is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I am recovered. It's Monday, and I've had a long weekend of sleep. I suppose I'm kind of. That's not really true. It's Friday, and we're recording this, and this is coming out on Monday, so I haven't had a long weekend of sleep. I'm a little tired from doing my Big Sur review.
Mm-hmm.
That's the truth, Federico. I can't pretend like it's Monday when it's not.
So just let me ask you: are you happy now that you're done? How does it feel?
I am very happy. Oh, it feels really good. I'm very excited. It was a long slog, and there was a lot of stress this year, only because Apple
it's 2020.
There is that. There is that overlay on basically everything. But on top of that, because of that, really, Apple's been doing things a little differently this year. For instance, iOS and iPadOS coming out right after the September event. And so I had no idea when Big Sur was going to come out. Turns out, unlike iOS, Big Sur came out later than ever for a macOS release. I mean, typically in the last few years, it has trailed iOS, but not by a lot. Usually maybe a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks at the most. But, we had iOS and iPadOS come out mid-September, and now it's mid-November, and we're just getting Big Sur. So, I think a lot of that had to do with the new Macs that were announced this past week. But yeah, it trailed, which was good because I wasn't ready in September, to be honest. And I probably could have been ready in October, just barely, but I didn't have to be. So I spent most of October working really hard and getting it finished. And it just, it's one of those things when it's been almost 5 months of research and writing and thinking about these things. It's just great to be able to share it finally and get it out there and kind of move on to other things. So yeah, I feel real good about it.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't share this. You wrote a behind the scenes sort of making of story for MacStories Weekly
right
in the newsletter. And we're going to talk about some more of those technical details in our members only show, MacStories Unplugged. But I wanted to ask you, because I don't think you share these numbers. Do you know how long you worked on this review in terms of tracked time?
I don't, and
Okay.
I haven't looked, and I'm not sure if I want to. Maybe I will. Though. I probably should. I probably should at some point. Yes, but
Okay.
I haven't looked, and I got a little sloppy with some of my time tracking towards the end. I don't have it broken out neatly between things like writing and editing and researching. It's kind of one big blob to a certain degree because I had some very long weeks in October where it was just a matter of starting a timer and then stopping, 12 hours plus later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting that you don't know the numbers. I had a shortcut for my review that I checked multiple times a week just to see how the counter was going up and up. So
yeah, it was a lot of hours. It was probably more hours than it should be. And that's something, that we'll talk about in Unplugged, is that I feel like writing is a slow, laborious process that takes a long time no matter what. But there are production side things that I could squeeze a lot more efficiencies out of, I think. And I in the past, I haven't done that. And primarily, I guess, because my past macOS reviews haven't been super long. Catalina was pretty long, but this is reaching into pretty long territory where those kinds of efficiencies make a difference. It came out to, I think, it depends how you count, but roughly 23,000 words, something like that. So it was spread over 15 pages on the website, had something like 150 or so screenshots, a few videos. We did an ebook for club members. Lots of stuff going on there. It kept me busy.
this is your biggest one today, right?
Yeah, it is. It's the longest thing I've ever written on MacStories. I think last year was Catalina was around 17 or 18,000 maybe. So this was a good 5,000 or 6,000 words longer, I think.
Very nice.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Pillow. Getting a good night's sleep is underrated, but with a little help, it can be life-changing, and Pillow can help you with that. I'll tell you, as I was getting towards the end of my Big Sur review, I had a couple of weeks there where I just didn't get enough sleep. And it's a problem because what happens is once you get sleep deprived. You may be getting less sleep because you have a lot to do, but you also start becoming more inefficient and you make mistakes. I've been there. What Pillow can do is it's an all-in-one sleep tracking solution to help you be more aware of your sleep patterns and discover what might be affecting your sleep quality. As I said, it's really easy to fall into bad sleep habits, but with Pillow, you can get back on track. And if you have an Apple Watch, tracking your sleep is as easy as wearing your Apple Watch during sleep. Pillow will track and analyze your sleep automatically. One of Pillow's most beloved features is its ability to get a detailed heart rate diagram for every sleep session. You can even compare your sleep quality to things like your weight, steps, caffeine consumption, and many other health metrics to discover what might be affecting your sleep. Pillow can optionally record sounds you make during the night, from sleep talking to sleep apnea and snoring and unexpected noises in your room that might be affecting your sleep. A lot of users have been surprised by the results. Pillow is also very privacy-minded. All of your sleep and audio data is encrypted and stored on your device and in your iCloud storage account using end-to-end encryption. Pillow doesn't have user accounts, so you can use it anonymously, and it doesn't collect or send your personal data anywhere else. Naps are a great way to boost your creativity and overall well-being too. So if you're working from home and you have a chance to take a nap, check out Pillow's Power Nap mode. Also, if you need an alarm, Pillow can wake you up using your iPhone, Apple Watch, or iPad. If your watch is running watchOS 6 or later, the latest update to Pillow uses the new extended runtime to minimize battery consumption on the Apple Watch too. Pillow has a new home screen widget that lets you track your latest sleep analysis and daily sleep goals too. Pillow is available on the App Store for the iPhone, Apple Watch, and iPad. Discover all of Pillow's features at pillow.app. Again, that URL is pillow.app. I'll put a link in the show notes too. Pillow, sleeping better made simple. Our thanks to Pillow for their support of the show.
Okay, so Big Sur. I still haven't put it on my main Mac Mini. I have it on an external drive, a Samsung T7 SSD.
Right.
But my Mac Mini is still on Catalina, mostly because I want to wait and see. Like, this is my production machine for the podcasts, and I want to make sure that audio utilities that I use, like Audio Hijack, for example, I want to make sure that they are fully compatible with Big Sur. And also, it didn't help that yesterday, like even if I wanted to, yesterday, as soon as Apple released Big Sur, all of Apple's servers basically imploded, and Big Sur was not available for basically nobody for a few hours, right?
Right. And it caused all sorts of problems because I guess there were issues with Gatekeeper and, validating apps when they launch. There were problems with messages. I really don't know. I didn't see any of those problems personally. I haven't actually updated my machines past the release candidates. And I don't really know if the binary is any different because I haven't had time to even check. My production machine still is on Catalina. I do plan to move it to Big Sur, but first I want to do a couple of tests with my MacBook Pro laptop to make sure that Audio Hijack works. That's probably the app that's most important to me. And I know Rogue Amoeba has said that they have a version that does work with Big Sur, but they have cautioned people against using it in a production environment. I do have other alternatives though, because my USB audio interface can record directly to SD cards. So between that and QuickTime, I'm kind of covered already if I can't use Audio Hijack. And I really, really like Big Sur a lot. So I really do want to move forward to it. I've just been super careful moving so far, particularly with the review coming out. I didn't want to do anything that would make, my work even more difficult as that came up.
Nice. Yeah. So I think I'm gonna I think I'm going to wait like couple of weeks maybe, but I really want to play around with Big Sur. Like I've only used it briefly, and in fact, your review was really useful to get to know some of the features that I don't think I would have discovered them on my own.
Mm-hmm.
But also like it is kind of strange for me because Big Sur is not like the Mac. It's not the kind of machine that I use on a regular basis. Like my Mac usage is pretty limited and kind of fixed during my week, right? I use the Mac for a couple of hours on specific days, always at the same time. And so my exposure, I guess, to macOS is very limited that way. And it's
Yeah.
very easy for me to have no clue as to what kind of features I'm supposed to find in a new version of macOS. I guess I know more this year because I've read all of your, like the entirety of your review. And I also, edited the review, which I didn't do last year or in the previous year. Like I read it, but very quickly, and I didn't exactly pay attention to the details because Ryan was taking care of editing the full review.
Right.
So I know more about Big Sur than, say, Catalina, for example. But I still feel like my usage is very limited. And on the other hand, though, I really want to play around with the new M1 Max. Like,
Yes.
I really want to. I don't think I want to buy one. Sylvia is considering the idea, but she's not sure about it. I think she's gonna wait for the 16-inch MacBook Pro model, or maybe the second generation of the 13-inch MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
But I'm really
That makes
intrigued by
sense to
those.
me with the kind of stuff that she does. I would think that she might want to wait. And that's kind of been I ordered a MacBook Air, and my greatest concern, I guess, was the RAM, the unified memory, really, that it's limited to 16 gigs. I did get a big SSD, a 2 terabyte SSD, because I've started to find that 1 terabyte is a little cramped. I mean, I have to start managing the storage a little bit with all the big audio files and things that I edit. So I'm looking forward to it because it's a secondary machine and a portable machine. I didn't feel like I needed to have necessarily as much RAM. I have 32 gigs in my Mac Mini, unlike you, I guess you discovered. I heard you mention that on Connected this past week. But I think you were remembering my Mac Mini is what I thought
It's
when
possible.
I heard
It's very possible.
that. But I like having 32 because I do tend to have a lot of apps open at once when I'm working at my desk. But that's not as true on a laptop. So I think I'll probably be okay with the MacBook Air. But I don't think I would replace my Mac Mini with the M1 version. I'm gonna wait. It's still the 2018 model I have is still really good. I'm gonna wait until they have something a little beefier, I think, for that,
Right.
because that's the one that I do most of my production work on. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Hover. When you have that one big idea, where do you go? Well, your business starts with a domain name. So, for many entrepreneurs, Hover is that first big leap. Hover has over 300 domain name extensions to choose from. No matter what you want to build, there's a domain name waiting for it. And they have excellent technical support to answer any questions you might have. And they're dedicated to getting you online, not upselling you. Hover has free Whois privacy, so the bad guys don't get your information, a clean UX and UI, and monthly sales on popular top-level domains, too. It's easy to see why Hover is the popular choice for people starting a business. I've got 7 domains with Hover. I've got all my kids' names, plus I've got a couple of variants of my own name, and 2 of them related to my business, too. That's the first place I went when I started the business. I went to Hover, and I got the domain name, made sure that the name was available there, and it was, so I got the .com as well as another variant. It was incredibly easy, and it's been very reliable for me. We know you like intuitive user experiences and things that just work straight out of the box, so you'll appreciate Hover. Their UX and UI really is simple, clean, and easy to navigate. Buy your domain and start using it today. Just go to hover.com/appstories so that they know you came from the show and get 10% off all new purchases. That URL, one more time, is hover.com/appstories. Make a name for yourself with Hover. Our thanks to Hover for their support of the show. I wanted to ask you, Federico, because I've been really close to this review for so many months now. What was it about Big Sur when you read through the review? What is it that kind of caught your eye? What are you most interested in?
I had no idea that Control Center was a thing, and and that you could take individual accessories from Control Center and put them in the menu bar. I honestly had no idea. I was very confused when I first read the review, because the first version, one of the first versions of the review, kind of took it for granted that people knew that was possible in Big Sur.
Right.
And later you clarified by, for people like me who, coming into Big Sur without having no idea what to expect. I really didn't know that you could not only have access to an iOS-like control center, but also do something that you cannot do on an iPhone, that you cannot do on an iPad, which is take an individual feature of control center and putting it as a shortcut of sorts in the menu bar, as a menu bar utility, as a menu bar app, essentially. So that was very surprising to me. And I was also very surprised by the absence of third-party access to Control Center, because that feels like the perfect opportunity for the Mac. The Mac already has menu bar apps that developers can make.
Right.
And, as a platform, it is more extensible. It is more versatile than iOS or iPadOS. So once I read about Control Center, I was sort of expecting, then I guess third-party developers will be able to make Control Center plugins or something. But no, that doesn't appear to be possible. So that was sort of a kind of a bummer, I think.
Yeah, that's a good place to start because, first of all, it was really good having you read the review from that perspective, because I did, especially in that particular section, take a lot for granted as to what people would know going into it, because, I'd been so close to it for so long. I kind of jumped into the middle, which you pointed out, and I revised that so it's a little, I think it's clear now as to how it all works. But Control Center is interesting because, it's very familiar. It's one of those things that's a big theme for Big Sur, which is creating this familiarity, not just for existing Mac users by preserving important elements from the past, but also making it familiar to people coming from the iOS and iPadOS side. And Control Center is obviously a familiar thing to people who use an iPhone or an iPad. The Control Center, though, is both more versatile and more limited than what you find on iOS, because as you pointed out, it doesn't work with third-party stuff, but you can do things like drag items out of it and put them in the menu bar. And that, I think, is an acknowledgement that really what the Control Center is doing on the Mac is it's just cleaning up your menu bar more than anything else. If you want, you can keep the things in Control Center so that you don't have that long string of icons across the top of your screen, which is particularly, handy when you have a laptop or something with a smaller screen. But if you have something that you use all the time and you don't want to have to click into the Control Center, you can move it up to the menu bar and use it from there. So that's an option with everything. However, not only are there not third-party options in Control Center, there are a lot fewer options than there are on iOS. I think I went in and I counted, and on iOS, there's something like 30 different options, and that's probably even more now because I was doing my counting on iOS 14, and now we have things like Shazam. But on the Mac, it's 9 different Control Center modules, plus 3 more that you can add from the system preferences for things like accessibility. So it's very limited, and you can't reorganize them. They're in fixed positions, which was true on iOS back in the day, but I think that was like maybe I want to say iOS 10. I forget. I went back and looked at your old reviews for iOS to kind of get a sense for what was the history of Control Center on iOS, and would that maybe be similar to what happens on the Mac? But it is limited. It's very limited, and the same sort of thing pops up again when you talk about widgets, which are, first of all, a lot of people aren't going to discover them because you have to click on the time in order to open the panel for widgets and notifications.
That was also very funny. Like I was not expecting the widgets to be there of all places.
Right. I mean, there used to be, you used to open up the notification center. It had a dedicated icon that sat there on the side of your menu bar, but Apple is one of the things that it's doing with Big Sur is consolidating and cleaning up the menu bar a little bit. And part of that, I think, which goes a bridge too far, is hiding this panel behind the time, which I thought about it a lot. I cannot see a reason why you would put this behind the time. But once you click the time, once you get in there, it's actually an improved feature, because it used to be that the panel would slide in from the side and you'd have a segmented control up at the top that lets you look at notifications or widgets. And notifications were just a long list of notifications from all your apps. Now those are stacked and they're in the top part of the panel. And then around the middle, you get a button. If you have a lot of notifications, which you can imagine, I always have a lot of notifications. You can see them all in the screenshot. There's a button and you click that and it'll expand them so you can see even more. But they're stacked, which saves a lot of room. It's a great feature. And it's easy to unstack them, expand that, look at things. The notifications are rich now, so you get things like, if you have a podcast comes in, you have play controls for the episode. If something comes in from Apple News, you can click on it and get the image from the article in a short sentence or two from the beginning of the article. A lot of things like that, which are really nice. And then below notifications are the widgets. And the widgets, you saw them. They're identical to what you have on iOS and the iPad, right? And they don't quite behave the same, though. I mean, it's interesting because on one level, they're very much like the iPad because they're limited to this panel. You can't put them on your desktop. So it's not like the iPhone where you can put them anywhere. And the other thing, though, that's even more limiting is you can't stack them. And that to me is a real shame because you already have a panel that's competing for space with notifications. Your widgets are limited to the lower half of this panel. And without being able to stack them, if you have more than just a few, you're already scrolling. So I think people are going to end up using far fewer widgets on the Mac just because of that more than anything else, the lack of stacking. But there are aspects of them that are even better because when you want to add or remove widgets, there's an edit button at the bottom, which is just like it was under Catalina. But when you click on it, it opens up a view that has a list of all of your apps that have widgets on the far left, examples of them in the middle, which are a little bit like when you're adding a widget on iOS, and then your active widgets that you have installed on the right. And what's interesting about it is that when you first open that up, nothing in the far left list is selected. So you have a view of all of your widgets in the middle. All the example widgets for all the apps are there, but they're not labeled as to which apps they're from, which once you start getting third-party widgets in there, it gets a little confusing because they're not necessarily named to correspond to the app.
Yeah.
So for instance, right, like Notes has one called Folder and another one called Note, I think. It doesn't refer to the name of the app that's associated with it. Now, easy enough, you click on something on the left, and an actual app on the left, you see all of its widgets and only its widgets. That's fine. It's just when you want to browse the whole collection that it's a little difficult. One nice thing that iOS doesn't have is that you can right-click on your widgets in the panel, and you can automatically resize them. So when you do the right-click, you get a menu, and it'll show whatever sizes are available for that widget, and you click on the size you want, and it flips back over and animates
into
the new size. It's really, really nice. They should
do that on iOS, really, on the iPhone, especially because if you try like so many times I try a small widget and then I realize, I actually want to make this the medium size. And it's so cumbersome to having to delete the widget and everything rearranges on screen. And then you got to go back into the widget gallery and you got to add in the medium one. It's so slow and tedious. It's so much better on the Mac.
You also don't have to click on a dedicated button to add your widget like you do on iOS. I don't know about you, but I've never gotten used to the fact that you have to tap on that add widget button on the bottom of the screen on an iPhone. I always want to, for some reason, tap on the widget itself, the example, and make that add it. But on the Mac, you can do that. There's, you can just drag it in or you can click on it and it'll go to the bottom. It's pretty nice that way. And I guess worth noting too that these are all built with Swift UI. They look identical to what you see on iOS. They work the same way. Really nice. I mean, I've tried several. I've tried, Music Harbor and Glimpse and Game Track.
Is there any widget that you were hoping to see on Big Sur that you still haven't found?
Well, There are a lot of apps I have that I would like to see widgets for. I'd love to see, like OmniFocus, for instance, do it. And they just updated their Mac app. For all I know, they have it now, and I haven't seen it. That was just like in the last 24 hours. But there are a lot of third-party widgets that I'd like to see. I was disappointed about the system widgets, though, because they're super limited compared to it's just like Control Center. There's a whole bunch that aren't there. And there's some that disappeared because, for instance, there used to be in Catalina, there was a calculator widget. That doesn't exist under Big Sur. And as a result, because unlike iOS, they did not preserve old widgets at like the bottom of the stack or whatever, that's just gone. You don't have the option for a calculator widget anymore at all. There's no maps widget. There is a music widget. It's there. Well, there's music's in the Control Center, not a widget. But yeah, there are a lot of system things where there just aren't widgets compared to what you would see on iOS. And hopefully it feels, both Control Center and widgets feel very, very 1.0 and very, very unfinished from a system standpoint. I think widgets will be okay because third-party developers can build them the same way they do their iOS apps. So I expect to see a lot of them relatively quickly. But from a system level with Apple's built-in apps, the choices are pretty limited. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Woven. It's funny, I was thinking about this the other day, that when I started writing at MacStories, all I really had to do was write. I didn't really have any other responsibilities, but over time, that has changed, and I've got a lot more meetings and events and things and scheduled stuff, whether it's recording a podcast or being on a Zoom call or whatever it happens to be. I've got a lot more things on my calendar than I ever did before, and it's easy when you're not used to that, as I wasn't for a while, to be disorganized. What you need is a great calendar system to help incorporate that with your task management and your day-to-day work. Woven is a great solution for this. Woven syncs all of your calendars in one place, including your Google, G Suite, and Microsoft 365 accounts, so you can see all of your time, both personal and professional. Woven builds scheduling links directly into your calendar so that you can use one-off scheduling links. You can quickly time block your entire week using Woven's smart templates so you can plan your perfect week and schedule. Woven also has built-in analytics so that you can easily calculate where you're spending your time, which is important because it gives you a good sense of whether you're wasting your time on certain things. Woven also has built-in analytics so you can easily calculate where you spend your time so you can make the most of your time concentrating on what matters most. You really need to check this out. Take control of your calendar and improve your workflow. And as a listener of App Stories, you can try Woven for free for 21 days. Just go to woven.com or click on the link in the show notes. Again, that URL is woven.com, WOVEN.com. Our thanks to Woven for their support of the show.
Talk to me about Catalyst, because this is one of the most exciting changes this year, the new version of Catalyst with the optimized for Mac flavor of it that brings a bunch of improvements that developers wanted to see last year in the first version of Catalyst. And you wrote about this before in the summer. How's the situation changed, I guess, for the better or worse now that Big Sur and optimized for Mac and the new version of Catalyst are out?
Yeah, you and I have talked about this a little bit before on the show, but Mac Catalyst really has gotten a lot better with Big Sur, and I think Apple rolled out Mac Catalyst too early. I don't think they should have previewed it in 2018.
That's a hot take. Okay,
it is a hot take. Because what they did, they previewed it in 2018 with 4 apps that weren't particularly good. They're very basic versions of Catalyst apps. And it wasn't until 2019 that we started seeing something a little more complex and involved. And then in 2020, we got Optimized for Mac. And Optimized for Mac makes a big difference because those early versions of Catalyst apps are scaled to 77%, which makes text blurry, makes everything look a little out of place. It's very hard to put your finger on, but it's a little bit of an uncanny valley thing at times. and there were fewer Mac-like controls and other options with the non-optimized for Mac version. So now what we've got is we've got a couple of different flavors of Catalyst. We've got the standard Mac Catalyst, which brings over an iPad app onto the Mac, and it's the simplest way to get your iPad app onto the Mac. There's the fewest number of tweaks that have to be made. And then there's optimized for Mac. And because it's not a scaled UI, there are more visual design changes that have to be made on the developer's part to make that work. And so it's more work, but it also looks a lot better. And you get a lot of things along with that that are standard Mac controls. Things like checkboxes, for instance, instead of toggles, the iOS style toggles. And you get crisper text. So it's much better for things like an RSS reader or something like that because it's just more legible. And if it's done right, they look almost indistinguishable from a native AppKit app. Now, I say almost because one of the things over the summer that I heard from a lot of people about is that there's still a lot of bugs and there's still a lot of things that don't just quite work exactly right with Mac Catalyst that Apple's going to have to address. They did a very good job with their own apps, with Messages and Maps. I think if you took Messages and Maps, which are Mac Catalyst apps that are optimized for Mac, if you took those, a year ago and showed them to someone and said, was this made with AppKit? I'd say most people, the vast majority of people, in fact, would not know the difference. But I think third-party developers have had a little bit of a tough time here and there. There are some really good apps that I've tried, but it's still a fair amount of work and a little bit buggy. So I think it's going to take a little while to take off. The reason I think that Apple was a little quick out of the gates with Mac Catalyst is just because it was a confusing story at the beginning. It was, we hadn't seen optimized for Mac yet. The early apps a lot of them didn't look great compared to an AppKit app. And at the same time, we got Swift UI. And a lot of developers were left wondering, how am I supposed to make my apps for the Mac? Am I supposed to use AppKit? Am I supposed to use Swift UI, which looks like the true future, like the long-term future? Or do I use this Mac Catalyst thing? And is this just kind of a dead-end transitional thing? And I really don't think it is. I mean, I suppose on some level, everything is a transitional technology because it'll get replaced someday. But sure. I think Mac Catalyst is going to be around, for a really long time, because what we have now for third-party developers are a whole bunch of different avenues to get their apps onto the Mac. And it's a really pragmatic approach that I like, because you're going to end up with some apps that aren't the prettiest. And maybe the simplest version of a Mac Catalyst app isn't always going to be the best looking. But I don't get as worked up about that as some people do, primarily because there have always been AppKit apps that don't look very good either. I mean, just because there are a lot of really beautiful AppKit apps that you can point to, and I can rattle off a whole bunch of them off the top of my head, doesn't mean that AppKit apps are inherently better apps or better designed apps. They have to be designed that way to be that way. And I think Mac Catalyst apps can be too, with optimized for Mac. So I think we'll get to a point at someday where people don't worry so much about how the apps are made for the Mac. They'll just worry about the apps themselves and whether they're good apps, kind of inherently, and not worry about what the underlying technology is. And the benefit of having all these underlying technologies is that they fit a lot of different circumstances, both business models, use cases. It gives a lot of different developers a lot of different ways to bring their apps to the Mac, which I think is healthy for the Mac in the long run.
That's a very good point. And also, I want to say, as someone who still hasn't upgraded to Big Sur, and also as someone who is primarily an iPad user, as I wrote last week in MacStories Weekly, I consider myself an iPad user who also owns a Mac as a secondary machine. Mm-hmm. But because I come from the iPad ecosystem, seeing this influx of Catalyst apps on the Mac App Store, I open the Mac App Store and I see all these new apps. And when I click on them, they say macOS 11 is required. It's pushing me to upgrade because a lot of those apps I know from iOS and iPadOS, and I also want to have them on the Mac, but I can't unless I upgrade. So I think it's a very interesting strategy in terms of, well, you're used to these apps on iOS and iPadOS. Now you're considering the Mac again. You should really upgrade to Big Sur. That's a very nice incentive for me, at least. Another thing that I'm seeing on the App Store right now, which I want to quiz you about, I guess, Safari extensions. So you wrote about this in your review. There's a new section on the Mac App Store curated by Apple with a bunch of examples. What do you think of this system? And do you think Safari will now be the home of thousands and thousands of extensions as we've seen them before on Chrome and Firefox?
Right. I don't think it's going to be similar to Chrome and Firefox, and that's primarily because even though Apple is making it easier for people to get their extensions onto the Mac, you still have to have an Apple developer account, a copy of Xcode, which means you have to build your extension on a Mac, so you have to have a Mac too. And you have to have a paid developer account to get it on the Mac App Store. So
you can just whip up some JavaScript and make an extension and
right. Okay. Right. You can't do that. Now, the big companies, maybe Evernote and whomever else makes extensions, they'll be more likely, if they don't already have one on Safari. I know Evernote does, but if they don't already have an extension on Safari, they'll be more likely to make one, I think. But some of the smaller developers, probably not. But Apple is making it easier. There are tools in Xcode. There is now they're kind of put alongside in their own category on the Mac App Store with regular apps. So they're elevated in the mind of customers to the level of regular apps, which I think is good because, just because they're in the browser doesn't mean they're not as useful as any utility that you get outside of the browser context. So I think that's good. I like that there are a lot of tools for people to bring them over. However, just because of the way, they're built, there is going to be some friction there still. Now, part of that is security. I mean, extensions are a security vulnerability, and Apple's done a lot to try to minimize that, and part of it is having to go through this process.
Yeah, I tried to install one as we were recording, and there were a bunch of permission prompts. I was able to authenticate with the Apple Watch, but you still gotta confirm a secondary alert saying that you want to turn on the extension. My question is, John, why are all these extensions blue in the Safari toolbar? Why is it does it mean anything that they're tinted blue?
Yeah, well, I don't think they're all blue. I have some that are not blue, but I think I think the third-party ones are colorful. If I recall correctly.
Is it because I'm on Catalina? I think it's because I'm on Catalina still.
Yeah, that might be.
Okay, I'm using the new Safari, which you can install separately on Catalina. So that's one of the features that you can use. Unlike, say, the new version of Catalyst, which requires macOS 11, Safari extensions, because Safari can be installed separately, you can use Safari extensions even though you're not using Big Sur. So I am on Catalina, but I can use extensions.
Right. Yeah, extensions aren't new. It's just the way that they're handled is a little bit different under Big Sur. And for instance, when you first install one of these extensions that's made for Big Sur, when you click on it, you're prompted by a popover that lets you decide whether you want to restrict it just to that website or just for that day or all time or all websites. You have some, as a user, you have some options as to how you're going to allow that extension to interact with your web browsing, which is nice. And there are not a lot of those on the store yet. I used one as an example in my review from an app called Blue Canoe, I believe it was, which is a dictionary app. Nice extension. I mean, you can, if anybody wants to see what this is like, I would say go check that out. I've got some screenshots in my review too. But yeah, there a lot of what you'll find so far on the Mac App Store, they aren't necessarily these new extensions. There's a mixture of the traditional extensions and the new variety.
So, John, I want to talk about design next. You have a design section in your review. Can you explain for those like me who are not necessarily well versed in Big Sur yet. What's new in design besides, the new look and just the new spaced out elements? Like those things I've seen on Twitter. But what's the big theme? What's the overarching theme in Big Sur, and what does it mean for third-party developers who want to implement these design changes and want to make sure that their apps are Big Sur ready?
Right. Well, it's interesting. I think Apple's walking a very careful line between the past and the future. They need to make existing Mac users comfortable with the UI that they're using, but they're also trying to meet the iPad part way, because when you think about it, a lot more people today are likely coming from an iPad or an iPhone to the Mac than to the Mac from another Mac. And as a result, things that are the way the UI is designed needs to work more closely together between the two platforms than ever before. And that's really just to make life easier for the user. And, they both they're both the foundation of iOS and iPadOS is, of course, OS X. But the two diverged over the last decade or so. And it was just getting to the point where it was very difficult to do one thing the same way on both platforms, because they just developed and evolved differently. Now, with the new design, apps need to be updated to follow that. And that includes things like, there's a new sidebar, there are new ways the toolbar icons look, the title of the window is in line with the toolbar and left justified instead of being in a title bar and centered. There's just a lot of little elements to that. The color has been kind of drained from the toolbar as well, though color is a much more important thing in the sidebar, just like it is on the iPad. And I think you're going to see a lot of apps that are going to be touted as Big Sur ready and M1 ready that aren't necessarily Big Sur design ready. And that's just because they haven't gotten around to it yet. I mean, there are a lot of little tweaks and visual tweaks that need to be made to make that work. And the work hasn't been done in all circumstances. But I think it's important, because I do think that those apps that don't do it are going to look dated very quickly, because we've seen already a lot of apps updated. It also fits very neatly with the Mac Catalyst look when you do an optimized for Mac app. And if apps don't follow kind of that new pattern, I think they're going to look out of place very quickly. And that kind of goes for the icons too, which now look a lot more like an iPad or iPhone icon, although there are real differences there as well. All right, Federico, we should probably stop there for today. If you let me keep going, I would just go on probably literally
this is
forever.
Your week. I mean, you've been waiting for this moment, so the spotlight is all on you.
Well, I thanks for that. It's fun to actually get a chance to talk to you about it, because, as much as we've worked together on all kinds of things all summer, we haven't really talked about macOS that much. So it is kind of fun to do. But I'm sure there will be lots more coming up, because one of the things we're going to be doing a lot more of on MacStories is covering a lot more of these apps, because as you said, there are a lot more apps all of a sudden flowing into the App Store. The Mac App Store has been kind of a sleepy place in the past, but I think that is on the cusp of changing. And when you add to that all the iOS and iPadOS apps that are going to be available for people with the new M1 Macs, I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things to talk about going forward on App Stories. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about these things in future episodes as well. I want to thank our three sponsors again for this episode. That's Pillow, Hover, and Woven. Of course, you can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is at Viticci on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.